Now, and I'm going to ask our three panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their field, about themselves, of course, about their fields and what kind of classes they teach. And we'll go in the order in which they appear on my screen, which may not be the order on your screen, but that is first Elizabeth and then Donna and then Dongshin.
Hi, everybody. It's really an honor to be asked to speak at this momentous occasion. My name is Elizabeth Klein, or Liz as I prefer, and I teach in the childhood special education program, specifically behavior disorders. And a lot of the courses that I teach are around teaching teacher candidates how to teach reading and writing and behavior and classroom management, behavior disorders, and practicum. And I am very excited to share some ideas today. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Donna. It's nice to see some faces that I haven't seen in many years. I used to be faculty at Hunter. I'm from the chemistry department, so Menashe and I worked together quite a lot. I was on her hiring committee, and we were really excited to have another person come into the department who was going to specialize in thinking about education rather than just chemistry-based research, and who would bring some of the innovations in thinking about education to the organic chemistry faculty, right? Which it's hard to do. And so Menashe and I both work in chemistry classrooms, which are incredibly content heavy. And that poses some problems when you're trying to do things like flip and active learning. But there are very clear and clever and boring and old ways to do this, right? And Menashe and I have explored over the years many of those. So we'll see. I have many things I could say. We'll see how the flow goes. And if you, I'll say right now, if you have any questions for me, please feel free at any time to just stop and ask them. And I'll let you dictate what we talk about in terms of implementation. And I've done this in very small courses, 20 students, up to very big, 850 students in a single room, right?
Hello, everyone. It's Dongshin Chang from theater. I'm very, very honored to be invited here to present my work. So I teach mainly theater history and literature. And I joined Esther's event quite a bit, and so that's when I started to learn all these ways that I can teach better. So I can't quite recall if I ever met Menashe in person, but I trust I must have. But so it's great that here I can share some of what I learned from Esther about flipping my classroom. I've been doing it from the big intro class of about 150 to smaller event graduate seminar of like a 10 to 12. And I've been, I would say that I found the approach very productive for me. And as an instructor, and from my students' feedback, they also appreciate this approach as well. And so I will share my experiences through a course today.
Thank you so much to Liz and Donna and Dongshin for being here with us today. The other thing that is a lot or at least at CUNY is very much on our mind, especially when we're thinking about our fall schedule, is like the modalities. We've been teaching in different modalities. We've been thinking about it. And so if you could give us an idea of in which modalities you have applied the flipped classroom, just again, to get a sample of the shared wisdom that we have here. Liz, do you want to start with this one again?
Sure. I call my work a melange because my favorite modality is hybrid, 1 week off, 1 week on, and I've applied it in that respect, but I have also applied it with Flipgrid, with VoiceThread, with Padlet, with video, with podcasting, and I have applied it with all online classes, but that's, more out of necessity than choice. And in person, I haven't taught fully in person since I first started here. So I will go with my fave, which is hybrid.
So I guess, Julie, we'll go in our same order again. I started flipping actually. I know this isn't the question, but I think it's relevant. I would have never imagined flipping my classroom, right? Chemistry is so content heavy and there's so much content to deliver to the students that the thought of not being in the room delivering that content would never have occurred to me. But when some of the big hurricanes hit many years ago, my course was running in the auditorium with 800 students, and we were moved online out of necessity because Hunter was using the space to help people whose homes had to be evacuated. And in that, I ended up creating very unstructured, unthought of videos and posting them for students, 45 minutes long each, multiple in a single sitting. And when we came back to in person, one brave soul put up their hand and said, "Can we have videos, please?" And that started a discussion in which the students said that they preferred video to me. And I was devastated, right? But what that did is led me to start to understand why they preferred the videos, right? And so then we realized that the video instruction was really useful. And so I started to use it in a fully face-to-face classroom where the students would do things, but I cut 0 hours from the course. I simply changed what they were doing at home and what they were doing in the classroom, but we used the same number of hours, both at home and in the classroom. I've also done this where we've cut some of the classroom time down in a semi-hybrid type model. When I was at Hunter, when I came to Lehman, I put all the hours back. And so I now have 4 face-to-face hours with my students in addition to the flipped instruction they receive at home. And then when COVID hit and we had to go fully online, that flip for me was really easy because I already had everything in place. And when I show you what we do in the classroom, that will make a little bit of sense because we're using a lot of technology in the classroom to apply the flipped modality. And so the fully online in our model also worked beautifully, right? So I've done all and I advocate for all.
I would say that I started to do things to ask students to do tasks before they come into the class gradually when I taught in person. And I would say that probably the push really happened during the COVID pandemic when I had to teach online, and I learned I joined the ASER workshops to learn how to really make online courses work. And so I would say that especially these past 2 years, that's the model I've been using. And currently I'm teaching a course in the high flex model, that a small class of 25. And so I allow the students to choose how they would like to learn in person, synchronously or asynchronously. And so I can report back on this. And so this is the first time I'm using, I'm combining flipped classroom with the high flex model. So I'm still in the process. Now we are a quarter, or like almost halfway into the semester. And so I'm still observing about the impact.
Thanks so much. So what a wide range of experiences. So let's go to the classroom now. So I'm going to ask all our panelists to take us to a class session, a flipped classroom class session, and share what happens there. And so what is it that the students have to do beforehand? What do you do in setting them up for that class time? What happens during the class time? What do the students do in class? What do you do? And just give us like a little tidbit and a little peek into a flipped classroom. And let's start with chemistry. Let's hear first from Donna.
Okay, so let me share some things with you because I think it'll be important to set the stage properly. So can you all see this? All right. So I think in order for me to talk about what happens in my classroom, I need for you to understand my logic flow, right? Because Flipped isn't just about the classroom. It's about everything that they do, both before they come and after they leave, at least in our model. And so for me, we work on what we call a learning arc. Okay, and so there are things that the students do at home. Let me put everything up just for ease on Zoom. There are things that the students do at home, and then there are things that I do with them in the classroom. And so on the bottom, you can see there's this idea of a content backbone. And chemistry has a content backbone. There are things we need to teach that are going to be assessed at the end of the semester using a standardized ACS exam that I don't write. Okay, and so it's important that I get all of the content in, and so I couldn't afford to just cut content. And so we move the content into this video backbone. And so what students do is they at home watch videos that's shown here in orange. And while they're watching the videos, in addition to taking notes, they go through a series of let's practice questions that are part of the videos, and those are optional. The students are told, pause the video here and try this problem. And then they try a problem, or they choose not to try a problem, right? And that is at the discretion of each student. And then the video proceeds to show them how to solve a problem once they have been introduced to the content. At the end of the video, they then need to do video questions that are embedded in an online platform. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. And again, those questions, while not optional, are not graded based on correctness. They're graded based on participation. So the student has to try all of those questions before they come to class, just to get themselves ready for what's coming. Okay, then they come to class and we do what's called clicker class, right? It's a very not a good name, but it's because we used to use a device called an iClicker, right? That's where clicker class came from. And so basically what happens during clicker class is I take all of the content from a given topic, which is like a chapter, which was presented through a series of videos, and I work problems. I don't deliver any new content during the classroom. I do build on content, so I give extensions to things. But the whole class is based on a series of questions, and the questions are leveled, starting at level 1 through level 4, and they increase in difficulty. So for a given topic, if it's really important, I might choose to do a question at level 1, 2, 3, and 4 on the same thing to get the students to really build even a mini learning arc within a very specific piece of content. Or some questions are level 1 only because that content is foundational and doesn't get any bigger, or level 4 only because it's very integrated and requires a lot of knowledge. Once we are done with clicker class, the students have office hours that are available to them that they can attend throughout the week to get help, both from myself and from a series of teaching assistants who work with me. And then they do online homework, again, inside the platform, right? So this whole arc comes together in the model, and one piece can't really stand alone. So what the online platform looks like that we're using now is this. It's called Top Hat, and my colleague Pamela Mills and I we didn't design the backbone, right? The platform existed, but we designed the course inside Top Hat. And so students have these folders on the left that they scroll through. I'm inside topic 19, which is the first topic in General Chemistry 2, just because that's what I'm teaching this semester. And you can see for each video, students have a tab here on the left that they need to click through. And then in the right, the video appears and they can click into it. They can do this on a tablet, on a phone, on a computer, it's up to them. They watch it. They then scroll down and the 3 questions are embedded underneath. And they have to do that for each video. And you can see this topic has 4 videos, and then the homework is underneath that. So they do that. And, you know, these are photographs from some of my classes at Lehman in person. And you can see, you know, I'm talking to the students, I'm walking around, they're talking to each other, staring up at the screen, talking again. You know, they even turn around during class and have very rich discussions. And that's part of what I think makes this work. You know, that it isn't me standing at the head of the room delivering, it's them working with one another in real time. Okay, and so some of these slides may not be that relevant as we move through this, but what we do is we build on something called a peer instruction cycle that was developed by Eric McGregor in Harvard in physics. And basically you ask a targeted question and then you let the students work on it and then talk to one another and then resubmit and then you discuss the question. But what we found is that we don't need the whole cycle in the flipped model. In fact, we've cut out this beginning piece where students submit an individual response and we go straight to discussion with peers. So I project a question and they start talking. I don't have to tell them to start talking. I do in the first couple of weeks, you know, talk to one another. This isn't a test. I'm not quizzing you. This is a learning process. Now I open a question and some of my students get up and go to the board and start explaining to one another, right? While I'm standing there. So sometimes I'm like, oh, you don't need me at all. And then we let them submit individual responses. So once they've had a discussion, they decide what they believe the right answer to the question is. There might be mathematics that they need to solve. And then we look at the class distribution. And so I let them see how they're all voting. And I think that's a very powerful part of this, because if they're getting it wrong, they realize they're not alone, right? Other people are also getting it wrong. And that can be very empowering for a student. And then I discuss the content with them and then we move on. Right? So the entire 2-hour lecture is this cycle of learning on the part of the student. And so the students really drive the learning. Sometimes the distribution is so spread out that we need to go back to a discussion with peers because I don't want to just give them the answer here. I'd like them to discuss whatever the misconception is that has come up. And so I'll give them some hints and then send it back to them. This is just for you to get a sense of the types of questions that I'm giving them. You know, I've told you there are these 4 levels. And so they're loosely mapped onto Bloom's taxonomy, but you can see that as we move up through the level, the hierarchy of the questions increases and the percentage correct on average goes down, right? Which is expected. So I can stop here, or I can very briefly show you through some math what one of these learning cycles might look like. Julie, should I go ahead and do that? Do I have time?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Show us.
So, you know, so in this learning arc, even in clicker class, there is a mini arc where we can increase the levels on a given subject. And so this is an example of, I'm choosing a series of math questions because I think that's the most relatable for most people in the audience, rather than chemistry questions where people may have no idea what I'm talking about. But if you look at this question, I'm asking students to match the terms with their numerical value. And so this is really memorization, right? And so this maps onto the Bloom's remember. Just, did you learn this? Did you memorize it? And so you can clearly see for level 1 type questions, the students are getting it mostly right. Right? And so this is what we then call a correct response. Most of the students vote for the correct. I don't have to do much in the explanation except remind them of the answer. And then we can make it more difficult. So here is then an example of a level 2 type question. So you can see here, I'm asking them how many kilometers are in a centimeter. So now to answer this, they have to know what a kilometer and a centimeter is. So they had to have done the memorization first, but now they are applying that memorization to a basic unit conversion, right? And this is a very easy unit conversion. And so these types of questions, interestingly, get a distribution of different types of responses. The one on the left is correct. The one in the middle is what I would call mostly correct, right? About 70-ish% are getting it right, but then there are some other dominant responses coming up. So students are making mistakes. And then we could also get this 50-50 flipped. Sorry, one of my students just walked into my office. I'm sending her away, one of my research students. So we could also get this 50-50 distribution, right? And this is what we call a split distribution. And it's hard to imagine that in such an easy question you might get this, but you do, because you can craft these to hit on a misconception that you know the students have. And so you sort of force them into a 50-50 split so you can address that misconception. And that happens here a lot, where students will get the sign wrong on kilometer and centimeter, and then they will answer the question in reverse. right? So then we can go on to look at a level 3 question. Again, this is still mathematics, but another unit conversion, but now it's a unit conversion that requires many steps to solve, not just a single step. So now they're not just memorizing, they're not just applying, they also need to evaluate the information that's given and figure out what order to apply these things in order to drive themselves to the correct answer. And if you look at the types of responses that come out, you can see now we are partially correct, still a little bit correct, but almost distributed is what we call this in the middle. And then over on the right, we almost have a 50-50 split again. And these are not histograms for this question. They are histograms for level 3 type questions, right? Just so you can get a feel. And then we can take it up again and do a level 4 question. And so here is another unit conversion, but now it's a conversion in which I give them nothing other than a long word problem. And so they have to have memorized things. They have to know how to apply those things. They need to evaluate what's given. And in this case, they also need to create a little bit of new knowledge, because I haven't explicitly taught them how to measure the area of a lawn, but they can't solve this problem without figuring that piece out. And so now when you look at the responses, we are distributed all the time, or we are split 50-50, depending on the question. And so even though I'm not teaching by lecturing, this series of problems is building the skill by building on each subsequent question as we move through that flow, right? And so this is what my classroom looks like, right? The students are sitting there talking to one another, solving problems, putting responses in, and the questions are getting periodically more difficult as we move through the 2-hour period. And then at the end of this, once they have finished, I'll save those slides for later. Then they go back to the platform, right? And in the platform, they do their homework. So in the last 30 seconds, what I can just do is show you, this is the platform live, right? So this is that slide screenshot I showed you was of this. And so students can click into the video, they can make it full screen. And then when they scroll down, they answer their questions. And you'll see there's some that are multiple choice. We can embed images. Some of them are matching. Some of them are writing a response. We can do fill in the blank. We can do click-ons. And so we get to create a variety of question types that the students are then linking to what we're doing with them in the classroom. And I think with that, let me give up the baton to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Donna. That was really insightful, and I think we all felt like we were in the classroom with you. Shall we go to Liz next?
Sure. I'm going to try to share the screen here. Okay, so that was excellent, and I teach a very different tone, feeling in my program. So I'm teaching this slideshow. You can look at on your own because I talked about so many things, including some of the research, but I want to go right to what I do with my flipped class. So I wanted my flipped classes to tie in with equity and advocacy. And I want to create a culture of interactive discussion and high expectations. So I'm not just teaching phonics, I'm teaching students the reason that they have to engage students in going all the way back to basics. So what I try to do in my flipped classes is I really try to research a hot, controversial topic for articles when I do articles. So I put the chili pepper here to show that I want to create a lot of discussion, because they tend to read articles that are about hot topics. And I have to credit Chow, because I do something in one of my higher function, more, the students are more advanced class, where I give a pre-course assignment. And the pre-course assignment is to read this article about the school to prison pipeline, and to come in ready to discuss it. And they can access this through a PDF, or they can access this through the Hunter College Library, a database, and to watch a video, and then come in ready for discussion. In my other class that's not so advanced, I will teach them how to annotate using Digo or one of the annotation tools, and I will collect the annotations. I will make them work on Google Docs so that they come in with something, and they do. And then we use it in the class. We have a great discussion about equity and advocacy for kids and race and culture. And then I give them an assignment, a group assignment, and then they have to post on Blackboard, and then they tie it in with their project, their phonics project. So another thing that I do is I give them a prompt, and a lot of times they don't even follow the prompt. They don't need the prompt, but I want them to connect it with the content. Why teach systematic phonics? I also do a demo lesson on Flipgrid, a series of them, so that they know what a phonics lesson looks like. Another thing that I do when we move up in reading comprehension is I send them a couple of PDFs of children's books. So they have to read about 3 children's books before they come to class. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it amounts to about 60 pages because they're targeted toward junior high school level or late elementary. And then they highlight it and talk about whether the piece connects to equity, advocacy, or maybe it's just a piece that teaches the kids about humor. So I pick the work for them. Yesterday, I gave them a very controversial poem, and I was worried about it, so I put a disclaimer on it before I shared it. But I also gave them a choice that they could pick something innocuous like Little Red Riding Hood, and I gave them literature all the way up from grade pre-K to all the way up to adult, so that there's a lot of choice in the work that I do. Okay, so here's something that I might give them, like the general readings on my syllabus. They're hooked to my syllabus and they have to read ahead of time, but I also give them a lot of videos to watch so that they see other teachers teaching, not just me, and that's really important. And sometimes I will give them a podcast. So those of you who are in education, or maybe you're not, but this is a really inspirational podcast, Jennifer Gonzalez, Cult of Pedagogy. So I will assign Cult of Pedagogy and they have to respond to it. That often comes with a blog. So if they don't like listening, they can, they can read the blog. And again, I never drop anything. We follow it up. And often it's part of a bigger project that they have to produce. I'm a Blackboard person. So everything that is housed in Blackboard, my material is accessible in course materials. They have to respond on Blackboard. And I grade them on Blackboard. And so that's my house for everything. And I add a lot of different media that they can watch because I love the way it embeds in Blackboard. It's you just search it out and then they can respond either right in Blackboard. For the future, I hope to, I'm experimenting a little bit with PlayPosit. And I hope to be able to, next time I design my courses, I may just have them purchase children's books, because as we move into in-person classes, I think it's important for the students to not only read PDFs, but to actually touch books and handle books, and also to be able to know how to do a read aloud for the kids, and to also meet in those small groups and actually look through the books. So another thing I do finally is you can look at the research yourself, but I use Book Creator and I demo it on Zoom. I also have them look at tutorials ahead of time on the Book Creator site. They have amazing tutorials. So that's kind of a flipped class that I do. So I'm not spending a whole lot of time teaching them how to do that in class. And also, if anybody's absent, they can still learn how to do their book creator book. I put up a lot of student samples from previous years. And I also put it on a Padlet so that they have all the information right there, linked in Blackboard. And I enjoy it. And later on, when we share some pitfalls, I'll share that too. So hope you enjoy the PowerPoint, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was full of great ideas for activities and for tools to use. So thank you so much. So let's now go to a world theater class.
Wow, I'm very, very inspired that I'm teaching in the field of theater. Again, a different field. And so let me share the course Blackboard side. And I learned a lot from the Assert workshops. And so same as Liz, I build everything on Blackboard, and I follow a weekly schedule. So that's what I build. For example, for week 2, I would have this. I would start with a through announcement. So Friday before the next week, for example, like this, I would say, this is what I'm going to ask you to do, what you should do. So that it's usually sent on Fridays. And so they will get that, and I encourage them to really dig into each folder. And so we'll use week 2 as an example. And I list what they need to do before class, to read, and then they need to post, and they need to join if they choose to attend in person, and then and the same, and then so it's like a cycle. And so if I go to this week, then you will see that I list about choosing the learning options to read, and then they post. And so I usually ask them to post before we have the first class section, and I divide the class up so that, for example, this week, since we're reading Greek theater and there's a lot, and we did reading, and I thought that we could enhance reading by doing some visual, like a research, and that's what I asked them to do and assign by there. See that this is a bit tricky, just trying to divide up the number of students, but anyway, it's a bit funky. But anyway, and so I asked them to locate and use that to talk about what they saw in the reading that we are reading for that Monday. That is this reading there. And so and this is in order to so I put a PDF format. So I've been using Padlet. So this is the Padlet, and I found Padlet very also I heard from students they enjoy Padlet in that you can see everyone's work that on the same page. And so I asked them to go through. So when we were in class, when we started to talk about the article, we go through what is in the article. So the article is like the backbone using Donna's vocabulary. And then we look at what they found in relation to what's been written in the reading, and then we discuss what they found. And then I also asked them to respond. I crossed out their names. And so so it's a kind of a interactive model for them to learn. And so during the class time, actually, we are on the Padlet forum quite a lot. We just look at each one's posting. And for those who join in person or on Zoom, and then we will share, and then we'll then discuss questions. Then I will answer any questions, and then respond to and what they did really brought to my attention about where they look for images and the resources. And I didn't say that you have to use this one, even though I suggested one. And that one library resource was rarely use. Usually people just, students just go to Google, and that really showed me how they learn. And so I would say that in my classroom, I spend most of my time discussing with my students. And that's what we do. And then and I try to really come up with good questions. And so my challenge before class is really each week I have to think about their workload, what they need to do. I really need to think ahead. What should I ask them to do next week and the week after, and what would be reasonable and what would be useful. And so the setup and design of the palette forums now occupy most of my time. That now that I know what I'm going to teach, I'm using the forums to help generate conversation and discussions, and that would be very important for us to learn better. And so this one is a visual research. We also did textual analysis, reading into plays and doing like various different kind of activities to help them learn about theater history. And so before the class, during the class time, and then after class, they have to catch up. So so to kind of complete the cycle, and then for me to see, and then for the palette forums, and they are graded by effort. As long as they do it, they are providing meaningful, like a work for the discussion and learning experience in the classroom, and that will work for me. And something that I thought was very and still it's very useful is that I am committed to meeting with my students individually outside class time. And then since quite a few students who chose to learn asynchronously, and I haven't seen them in class, but they have been producing work, and I really don't know who they are. And so it's kind of interesting. It's a very new experience for me for this small class of 25. And it's really interesting for me to learn why they choose this way of learning, that way of learning, and then also about their educational journey. So that helped me see their work, and also help me see how I can take the class further. And so that's what I did. And one thing you saw that actually here, that's something I am still not in this week, and I will stop here, is that I try, and then for week one, so you see I am falling behind. Week one, I make the videos, and this is my little lecture video. I'm trying to really figure out what I should provide for them beyond the reading, because the readings are accessible, not too difficult, and what I should do to help them learn more. And so this is something I'm trying, and I'm checking the viewership, and so far the viewership is not too high that I can track. And then so I'm still trying to figure that out, what I can help them learn better. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. And that was one beautifully organized Blackboard module. I mean, I knew what to do if I were a student in your class, and I wish I were. So thank you.
And I learned all these from Assur's training workshops, like from Julie, actually from you.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a really beautiful module. Thank you. So through your answers, we've heard a lot about the advantages, and Liz talked a bit about pitfalls already. So we'll get to that, but I want to first ask all of you. I'm curious, and I think our audience will be too. Is did you explicitly introduce this as a model to the students? Is it on your syllabus? Did you encounter some initial resistance, or how did students respond at the beginning, at the end? Can you share a little bit about that? And I'll open mic, whoever wants to go first. Yeah.
Well, I have these students for years, and I'm also partially their advisor. So they know, I introduced this about 5 years ago, so they know. And I also have it on the syllabus. And they did not resist the pre-course homework, which really surprised me. But sometimes, and I'll get to that, not everybody reads the material or views it as,
So I can say in chemistry we have a lot of resistance. So, you know, chemistry is a very content heavy course. And so over the years, we know there's been a lot of research done to show that the students who are getting A's are putting in 10 to 20 hours a week outside of class time. And so what the flip model does is it sort of forces everybody to put in that time, whether they want to or not. And so the students who feel like they would have been successful without the time, even though they're mostly misinformed, but that is their opinion, they hate the model because they feel like they have too much work and that it isn't fair, and that they don't want to do this work. Bear in mind, general chemistry is a first-year chemistry course. So a lot of the freshmen coming in are comparing it to their high school experience, which is in general not equatable with the college experience, but they don't know that yet. And so they have a hard time with this. That said, by the end of the semester, a lot of the students love this model. We've been doing it for a long time. Hunter's been doing it since I think we started in 2012 at Hunter doing this. And in Lehman, I flipped immediately in 2015 when I got here. And so it's not new to the students that this is the model, especially the students who are not freshmen in the course. It's probably 50-50 freshmen and others in general chemistry. And we probably have 50% excited and 50% hating it at the beginning. But by the end, I would say most of the students are on board, but there is a percentage who hate the model and thus hate the professor all the way through to the end. That is always true. In a big class, it's overwhelming because, you know, when you're teaching 800, 10% is 80. That's a large number of students to have hating you online. But so my advice to anyone would be, when you start, it's going to feel hard and there may be resistance, but the students do start to love it, right? They really do. I have a slide with some student responses. It's not worth showing you, but I can read to you. You know, here's one, and a student says, "It was the first time I'd ever taken a course in a flipped classroom, and I love it. I was very skeptical at first, and I didn't want to do the work. I didn't know whether or not it would work for me, but it's a great way to learn." So, you know, that's an interesting perspective from the students. A lot of them really like the structure. I didn't show you, but there's a pacing guide that the students print as a PDF page that gives them all the deadlines for the semester. And then they need to work out organizing their time to make sure that they meet all of those deadlines in a timely fashion. And for many of our students, the problem is they don't know how to organize themselves in a college classroom. And so that begins to start building that skill for them so that they can start implementing that skill in their other courses. That said, some of the students hate it all the way out. The flipped classroom takes too much to get used to and the model is very annoying. That's another quote from a student, right? So you don't get them all to love you no matter what. But don't give up. So do I have one more minute? Because then I would like to share one thing with you. You can let me know if you can see this. This is why you shouldn't give up, at least if you're in a content heavy course and you feel like you don't want to do this because they resist. The green is pass, the red is fail, and the orange is withdraw. TR is a traditional lecture and FL is flipped. And so you can clearly see that there's an improvement in the student outcomes. You know, at Lehman especially, we have a lot of the underperforming students because they come in not really college ready. Lower performing compared to the Hunter High School students that come in. And this completely changes their ability to succeed in the course, despite the fact that some of them hate it. They still do much better than they would otherwise, right? So I think it's an important thing to just see that.
Wow. And so I think that explanations really help, that why I am doing that. And also I'm teaching in a field that I'm teaching critical thinking and writing in a field of like creative exploration. And I wanted to make the course interesting and I need their input. If they just sit there, it's going to be very difficult to. And challenges would be how to get the students into this kind of habit, thinking that they are in this class and I will be asking them to share. Because some students anticipated that they would just hear, history, boring, just going to hear a lecture, take notes. And I said, sorry, no slides, no notes. And then, but we're just going to discuss. That took some time. And I said that I need to hear from you. You need to say something so I know what you're thinking and we can discuss. So that would take some time. And then also how to create that culture in a classroom. And so I will eyeing the time. I would say that this semester, since I'm trying the high flex, is really interesting that at the beginning, half of the class chose in person, and now week 6, week 7 in, now I only have 4 students who chose in person. At first, I was kind of shocked, and also very few students who chose on Zoom. I was very nervous what happened, but when I look at their work, the work is still consistent. Very good. And so that's when after I spoke with each of them, I learned how they choose. And it's really, they have so many things they need to juggle: life, family, school. And if my class offers flexibility, they will definitely take advantage of that if they can work by themselves and they can produce good work. But some students really need that in-person connection. They really need that. They just can't learn online. So this is very interesting for me to learn about students, about their choices and how they learn. And so I guess I'm just having all these thoughts about how can I teach students better, as a group, and how to also accommodate their different schedules and learning styles, but still not really reducing the kind of the standard in what they need to do. So I'm still on this journey. But I would say that for students who I see now, if they show up on Zoom or in class, I know they are there really, they just know what we're going to do, and the discussions have been good, even though the number is really small now. But so it takes some adjustment for me as well.
Thank you so much, and we'll continue our real talk. We've heard from you already a little bit what the challenges may be. So with the 4 minutes that we have left together, if you can share some of those challenges, how you address them, and package them together with some advice for people for thinking, yeah, that is something that I want to try out in my class. And again, feel free to unmute yourself and share some final thoughts for our participants today.
Well, I mean, for me, it takes a lot of organization, and I probably should keep a notebook, because as I was making this presentation, I was learning from myself and realized that I probably need to I probably need to start researching material way ahead of time, because the material itself has to be super motivational. The other thing I learned that's a challenge is there are some students who learn better socially, that social learning theory. So the ones that aren't getting a particular unit, they seem to need others. And maybe those are the units that should be in person, with whetting their appetite before, we meet, the more difficult units. So as for me, it's a matter of taking notes and making sure that I follow my own notes.
So I could speak about this forever, but I think one parting thought, and I don't know where you all feel, and I don't know where Hunter stands on this, but with regards to coming back to in person, there's a huge number of challenges that we're facing right now, and one of them is to do with student self-efficacy. One, what do they believe? And 2, are their beliefs accurate, right? And so what we came back to in person in chemistry in the fall, and what I realized to my horror and shock because I thought online was working, is that my students no longer knew how to even memorize basic facts because they no longer needed to. They spent 2 years using resources to help themselves, which is a great skill. They knew where to find everything they need, but they could no longer take notes. We had a discussion in which they told me they couldn't listen and write at the same time. I was shocked. I'm like, this is a basic skill, right? You can listen and write, and they've lost that ability because they haven't been doing it for the last 2 years. And so if you're thinking about flipping or you're thinking about active learning in the classroom, really think carefully about how you can get the students back, right? How you can get them to value the skill set that they have lost over the 2 years. Because there are skills that have been lost. There are skills that have been gained, don't get me wrong, but there are essential skills to content-heavy courses that they have lost and need to relearn. And it was a catastrophe. In my class, the pass rate was 20% last semester. We moved 180 students out of Gen Chem into a brand new intermediary course because they just weren't ready to even memorize. They didn't know how.
And then for me, it's like, yes, I should continue that. When I met with students individually, some of them admit that they really chose asynchronous really out of convenience because they have other top priorities. And so I had to, and then some of them, slack off, and I had to encourage them really to rethink again if education is really important for you, right? And then and I will agree with Liz, planning ahead and continuing to be motivated, say that actually I'm using this to help myself because I could be a great procrastinator. I could continue to prep, forever for a in-person lecture. And now I have to be at least 1 week ahead, at least. And so I'm helping myself to be better prepared for the class. So that's something, but I'm still on this journey, so.
Can I add one thing, Julie, just in response to something that came in the chat? Someone is asking about the videos. Do you think it's important to have you on the screen, or do you use graphics and just voice? I don't have myself on the screen. I am in the very first video saying, hi, I'm Donna, I'm the voice who's going to guide you through chemistry. Because students need something to attach to the voice. But I also, you don't all know this about me, but I do chemical education, pedagogy research and publish on that. And some of our findings are that a talking head is actually distracting from students. It draws them away from the content rather than gets them excited. They need to know what the person looks like, even if it's fake. Some of our students said, you can give me a blue Yeti and I'm fine with that, but give me an image to associate with the voice. So they need that. And the other thing is that it doesn't have to be your voice. So we did a study a couple of years ago where we had 6 faculty teaching in different modalities, all using my videos. I was not part of the study, and the success rates were equally good in all of those courses as compared to my course. So it doesn't even have to be you on the videos, but the videos need to be consistent. You can't pull together 85 random videos from the internet. It feels disjointed. So whatever it is that you're using, have it be as coherent as possible. Put a cover slide on all of the videos so it feels like yours, but you don't have to be on the video and it doesn't have to be your voice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much to our 3 presenters, to Liz, to Donna, to Dongshin for sharing your experiences. And thank you so much, Minashi, for the inspiration. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope to see you again on Thursday. Thank you so much, and take good care. Take good care, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks.